Peter's sneakers squeaked as he hurried to his locker. A sticky note fluttered to the floor as he opened his locker. A crude drawing of a pig with his name scrawled beneath it. His throat tightened. Just ignore them, he told himself. He had already tried reporting them a week ago, but the assistant principal just sighed and told him, "We can't do much unless we catch them in the act, Peter." At that moment, he realized he was on his own. But then he heard her voice. "Nice artwork, Piggy." Eris leaned against the adjacent locker. Her glossy lips curled in a smirk. Behind her, a bully named Brad snatched his math textbook and tossed it to Marcus. "Give it back." Peter lunged, but Brad shoved him hard. His shoulder slammed into the locker with a metallic clang. "You're pathetic," Eris said, twirling her hair. "Even the teachers pity you." At lunch, Peter hid in the bathroom stall. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, and then he heard a click. The door had been locked from the outside. A crumpled note fell under the door. It says, "Stay in there. Nobody wants to see your face." He finally had enough. A stinging memory of being locked in the janitor's closet last year by these same bullies flashed in his mind. He'd pounded on the door until his fists were raw, only to be laughed at. Now he couldn't stand another day of it. That afternoon, with a heavy sigh and tears in his eyes, he walked to the administrative office and handed the letter to the secretary. It was his withdrawal letter to quit the school. As he left the building, a strange mix of relief swirled inside him. He hoped his parents might understand, but they didn't. They told him if he wouldn't stay in school, he couldn't stay under their roof. They didn't see his pain, just another failure. Within hours, he was packing a duffel bag and stepping into the night, lost and unsure of what came next. With the little money he had, he found refuge in a cramped, run-down apartment. By week's end, a kind-hearted convenience store owner gave him a part-time job, relieved by the small advance paycheck and the unexpected compassion. He worked diligently, trying to keep his head down and do everything right. One of his co-workers, Mira, was a college girl working evenings. She was strikingly attractive and knew it. From the moment Mira laid eyes on his round figure and awkward demeanor, her expression twisted in disdain. She rarely spoke to him except to bark orders. "Hey, stock these drinks faster," or "You missed a spot when sweeping." Peter found a twinge of fear mingling with his anger. If she hated him this much over small mistakes, how far would she go to get rid of him? One quiet Tuesday night, the store was almost empty. Mira was leaning on the counter scrolling through her phone while he mopped the floor. Suddenly, she spoke up. "So why aren't you in school? Got tired of failing classes?" He paused, the mop handle clutched tight in his hands. I just needed a change," he replied softly. Mira smirked. Or maybe they got tired of having a loser around. He kept his gaze on the floor, willing himself not to react. One evening when Peter was restocking snacks in the far aisle, a group of Mira's college friends entered the store, laughing and chatting. Mira lit up, flipping her hair back, eager to impress them. Peter tried to stay invisible behind the shelves, but one of the guys pointed him out. "Who's that?" he asked loudly. "New helper?" Mira glanced over and gave a cruel little smile. "Oh, just some dropout who works here. He's pretty useless. And gross, right?" Her friends snickered, their eyes briefly meeting Peter's before he quickly looked away. It was exactly like school all over again. That awful feeling of being less than human. Later that night, after her friends left, Mira confronted Peter near the storage room. "Listen, fatty," she hissed. "Don't think you can slack off just because the owner pities you. I don't want to be cleaning up your messes." He opened his mouth to protest, but Mira cut him off. "In fact, I don't think you should be working here at all. It ruins my day seeing your ugly face." All he ever wanted was to fit in. Instead, he was met with scorn for his appearance wherever he goes. The next day, Peter arrived at the store as usual, only to find the owner, Masa, looking unusually stern. Mira stood beside him with red, tearful eyes. Masa began in a grave tone. "We need to talk about something serious." Mira shot Peter a venomous glance behind Masa's back. Then she sniffled dramatically. I didn't want to cause trouble," she said in a choked voice, "but I can't stay quiet. He harassed me." His heart stopped. "What?" he stammered. Peter felt sick. "That's a lie," he managed to cry out. He looked at Mira, pleading, completely bewildered by her cruelty. "I was terrified," Mira whispered, dabbing at fake tears. "I thought he was going to touch me. I pushed him away and ran." Peter's vision blurred. He'd been nothing but respectful and silent around her. But deep down, he knew. She hated him for how he looked, for existing in her space. This was her way of getting rid of him permanently. Masa sighed heavily. "This is a serious accusation. Normally, I'd have to report it and let you go, Peter." Mira's lips curled in satisfaction, but Masa wasn't finished. "However, I checked the security cameras." He pointed to the small CCTV camera above the storage room door. "They show you were shelving soda crates at the front during the time Mira said the incident happened. You never even entered the storage room then." Mira's face went pale. She hadn't realized the cameras covered that angle. Masa's expression hardened as he turned to her. "Mira, I'm very disappointed. False accusations like this can ruin lives." Peter stood there as the wave of relief and shock hit him. He wasn't getting fired. Mira glared at him with pure hatred as Masa escorted her to the back office to discuss her behavior. That evening, he finished his shift in silence. When closing time came, Masa patted him gently on the back. "I'm sorry, son. I know she treated you badly. I spoke with her. If she wants to keep this job, she'll have to change her attitude." He tried to smile, but Peter could barely return it. He mumbled a thank you and stepped out into the night. School had been hell, and work wasn't much better. Why did everyone judge him by his looks? As he walked along the quiet sidewalk, every step felt heavy with loneliness. His apartment was miles away, and tonight the distance seemed endless. He approached the old stone bridge. Normally he'd stop here to watch the moonlight on the water and calm himself, but tonight he just wanted to get home. Head down, lost in his misery, he didn't notice the lone figure coming toward him until it was too late. He collided with someone as he stepped onto the bridge. The impact was sudden. He yelped as his foot caught on a loose piece of the curb. He fell from the bridge into the raging river. He thrashed, panicked, but the current was too strong. Darkness closed in as he swallowed mouthfuls of water. "Is this how it ends?" he thought. Suddenly, someone grabbed his arm and fought to pull him toward the surface. With great effort, the stranger dragged him onto a muddy riverbank. He was barely conscious. Half conscious and gasping, he caught a good glimpse of a woman's face, hair dripping, eyes locked with his desperate focus. She checked his pulse, then dug into her bag, pulling out a strange metal syringe. He noticed a faint symbol glinted on the syringe, a serpent coiled around a sword. He heard her trembling words. I'm sorry, Peter. It's necessary." A hazy thought flickered. How does she know his name? But the question died in his throat. The needle pierced his skin, and an intense heat surged through his body, swallowing his senses until the world dissolved into darkness. Later, soft morning light filtered through closed eyelids. Peter slowly regained consciousness. His body was sore in places he couldn't quite pinpoint. He was lying on something soft, a bed. For a moment, he wondered if the previous night had been a dream. Then his gaze met the mirror, and his breath caught. What he saw made him freeze, convinced he was still dreaming. Staring back at him was a tall, lean young man drowning in oversized clothes. The face, the voice, was it his? It had to be, but it was so changed. His once round cherubic face was now defined with a strong jawline and high cheekbones. His heartbeat thrummed louder than usual, and every muscle felt coiled, ready to spring. He worried that if he gripped the bathroom doorknob too hard, it might snap. He looked like one of those handsome actors or anime protagonists he used to admire. The memories came flooding back. The bridge, the fall, the woman in the suit, the injection. It must have done this. Peter stumbled back to the bed and sat heavily. He remembered her apologetic expression, and the fact that she'd known his name. Clearly, she had brought him home after injecting him. But who was she really? 1,000 questions bubbled up, but one emotion overpowered them: exhilaration. It was crazy. It was unreal, but it was wonderful. In a giddy rush, he ransacked his closet for old clothes from years ago, something smaller that might fit this new physique. He found a t-shirt and sweatpants from middle school that, back then, had been tight on him. It would do for now. He grabbed his phone to check the time. It was already past the start of his shift. He overslept. As he half jogged to the convenience store, he noticed an unfamiliar spring in his step. His body felt light, powerful. Out of curiosity, he sped up to a full run. To his amazement, the world around him seemed to slow as he moved. In a blur of exhilaration, he covered the last 2 blocks to the store in mere moments. This was incredible. Peter took a deep breath and rounded the corner to the store entrance. The bell chimed as he stepped in. Masa was at the register, but he was with a customer. Peter hovered near the doorway, suddenly nervous. What if Masa didn't recognize him? How would he explain? The customer left and Masa looked toward the door. "Welcome," he began, then stopped, peering at the young man. "Can I help you?" Peter swallowed. "It's me, Peter," he said softly. The poor owner's eyes went wide. He quickly came around the counter, staring at Peter from head to toe. Peter gave an apologetic half smile. "I know, I look really different. I can explain, sort of." Masa was bewildered. "Different? My boy, you look like a complete stranger." "It's a long story," Peter said. "Something happened last night, but I'm still me, I promise." He admitted to Masa about the near accident on the bridge. He left out the part about the injection. That sounded too unbelievable. Masa shook his head in wonder. "This is incredible, but are you sure you're okay? Should we get you to a hospital?" Peter quickly shook his head. "Actually, I feel amazing. Please, can we keep this between us for now?" Masa studied Peter, then nodded slowly. "I'm just relieved you're safe." Peter nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. Masa was trustworthy. He'd proven that by standing with him against Mira's lies. It was a quiet morning. Peter busied himself with stocking and cleaning as usual. Right on time, the bell chimed, and Mira strutted in, a latte in hand. As she headed inside, she froze mid-stride. Over by the snack stood a tall, lean young man, easily the most striking person she'd laid eyes on. Her heartbeat quickened, and before she realized it, she'd inched closer behind a snack display. Unable to contain her curiosity, she discreetly raised her phone. snapping a single photo from the side. She peered at the image, fighting a stunned grin. I have to show my friends this later, she thought. Gathering her composure, she approached him. Hi, she ventured, offering her warmest smile. I'm Mira. You're new, right? He paused, meeting her eyes briefly. Nice to meet you, Mira. Then he turned back to the shelf without giving much else away. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She lingered near him, pretending to tidy a display of gum packets. So, you go to college here or something? He gave a slight shake of his head and mumbled something non-committal. Mira's curiosity only grew. Who is he? An hour later, during a lull in customer traffic, Mira tried again. Leaning on the counter while he worked nearby, she said casually, "You're surprisingly good at this. Last guy was a total disaster. Overweight, always messing up. Honestly, we're better off now." She gave a dismissive little laugh. She could have sworn she saw his shoulders tense for the fraction of a second, but all he said was, "I see." Then he carried on, placing items with careful precision. Mira blinked, half confused by his reaction. He's so calm, maybe shy, she wondered. Clearing her throat, she changed tack. Anyway, she pressed, "I didn't catch your name. Are you from around here?" There was a slight hesitation. Finally he rose, turned to face her fully, and offered a small plastic name badge. Her heart gave a jump at the name etched on it. Peter. For an instant, her mind didn't connect the dots, but then memory slammed into her. Peter, the same name as that chubby boy she had ridiculed. Her stomach lurched. She gaped at him, lean, confident, totally changed. "You're Peter?" she whispered. He inclined his head. "I am." Mira felt the sweat drain from her cheeks. She'd just bragged about how useless the old Peter was, to his face. I didn't realize," she managed, voice cracking. "You're so different." People change," he replied gently. "Seems you never noticed." Guilt tore at Mira's chest. "Peter, I'm sorry," she choked out. I swear, I didn't know it was you." He set down the badge gently, lifting the next box of inventory with ease. "Doesn't matter," he murmured, not meeting her eyes. "Let's just get back to work, okay?" Mira swallowed a surge of regret. She wanted to explain, to beg him to understand she hadn't known. Without another word, he turned and continued restocking, leaving her standing there. Customers dropped in for snacks and drinks. The cash register chimed as they paid. More than once, she tried approaching him when the corridors were empty, her eyes pleading for another chance to talk. But he always replied with a short, cordial sentence, just enough to keep her at arm's length. Around noon, a delivery truck arrived, dropping off a crate of bottled water that usually required 2 people to move. Masa prepared to help, gesturing for Mira to join them. Before she could step forward, Peter spoke up, "I'll handle it." Mira hung back. She watched in shock as he bent his knees and hoisted the hefty crate by himself. "My word," Masa muttered, half in disbelief. "Where'd you get that strength, son?" Peter only gave a polite shrug. The quiet confidence in his expression made Mira's heart jolt with guilt. She had never expected this from the boy she once deemed worthless. Later, a customer struggled to yank open the store's notoriously jammed soda fridge. Mira hovered by the register, uncertain whether to call Peter for help. He appeared on his own, gently moving the customer aside. A second later, the metal handle gave a screech and snapped right off in his grip. Peter stumbled back, eyes wide, staring at the broken piece. The startled customer, simply relieved, thanked him and walked off. Mira raised her eyebrows. You, really put your back into that?" She half expected him to apologize or grin sheepishly. Instead, he glanced at her with a calm. "I'll fix it," he said simply, then went for a screwdriver. When Masa saw him reattaching the handle, the owner chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder. Better to have a helper who's too strong than not strong enough, eh? But there was an unspoken question in his eyes that Mira also felt. How had he changed so drastically? At closing, she waited by the door, shifting from foot to foot. She wanted to say something, apologize properly for the insults she'd heaped on him in the past. But when he finished counting the register and walked over, her courage evaporated. "Good night," was all she managed. Peter nodded. "Night, Mira." His polite tone stung more than anger might have. She lowered her gaze, stepping aside to let him pass. He grabbed his jacket and headed outside, the twilight air cool on his skin. He contemplated his next steps. The thought that had been brewing all day now surfaced clearly. He could go back to school, not as the old Peter, but as someone new. With these abilities and this new appearance, at the very least, he could ensure that his bullies faced consequences. That night, before sleeping, he decided to test one more thing. He dropped to do push-ups, something he'd always struggled with. To his astonishment, he cranked out 200 in under a minute, hardly breaking a sweat. Settling into bed, he thought of Mira and whispered, "Funny how apologies only come when you're someone worth looking at." Whether by accident or miracle, he would make the most of this second chance. Monday morning arrived with bright skies. Peter stood outside Westbridge High, the very school he had fled from weeks ago. He had decided to go by the name Jin Parker at school. The first hurdle had been the school administration. That morning, he brought Masa as his guardian, and they met briefly with a secretary to submit his papers and a guidance counselor who welcomed him. As he expected, none of the staff recognized him. Once the paperwork was completed, Masa turned to leave but paused at the door, looking back fondly at Peter, carefully choosing his next words. You know, when I was your age, I had a similar problem. Kids mocked my accent, my clothes. Back then, I thought changing myself would fix everything. His gaze softened. But eventually, I learned that the people who truly matter see who you are, no matter how you look. Peter nodded slowly, gratitude filling his chest. Thanks, Masa. I'll remember that. As Masa left, Peter took a steadying breath. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. Now, standing in the main hallway just before first period, Jin felt a jolt of adrenaline. As he walked through the hall, conversations hushed. People started noticing the unfamiliar handsome stranger. A few curious glances turned into outright stares. He could overhear murmurs with his heightened hearing. Wow, he's cute. And, I've never seen him before, have you? He forced himself to appear relaxed, even flashing a friendly smile at a couple of students who were gawking. Jin approached his locker. As he dialed the combination, a cheery voice piped up beside him. Hi, you must be the new transfer? He turned to see a girl and a warm smile. She wasn't part of the popular crowd. He remembered her name, Lily, one of the few who had never been mean to him. Yeah, I am, he replied, returning her smile. Name's Jin. Hi, Jin. I'm Lily. If you need any help finding classes, let me know, she said brightly. Her friendliness seemed genuine. Thanks, I appreciate it. Actually, could you point me toward Mr. Carter's English class? She laughed. Lucky you, that's my first period too. Come on, I'll show you. Lily chatted about the school casually, giving him a quick rundown of teachers and the upcoming spring festival. Jin listened, grateful to have a friendly guide. They entered English class and took seats. He had to concentrate to not react strongly when he saw Brad and Eris in the same class. Neither paid any attention to Jin yet. Brad was busy talking loudly with a buddy, and Eris was scrolling on her phone, bored. Class began, and the teacher introduced Jin Parker to everyone. All eyes were on him as he gave a polite, short introduction. Hi, I'm Jin. Looking forward to studying with you all. He'd practiced that line to sound breezy. It seemed to work. A few students smiled back, and he even caught Eris glancing up with sudden interest. As the lesson proceeded, Jin's enhanced focus made it easy to follow along. For now, he played the part of the pleasant new student. However, an opportunity came sooner than he expected. After class, as students funneled out into the hallway, he heard a commotion by the lockers. His keen hearing picked up a familiar, cruel laugh. One of Brad's friends, Marcus, who was also a notorious bully. Guided by instinct and a sense of justice, Jin strode toward the noise. Sure enough, Marcus had cornered a nervous-looking boy against the lockers. It was Felix, skinny and timid, clutching a notebook as Marcus poked a finger in his chest. Eris and a couple of others were watching nearby, smirking. It was a scene all too familiar, one that made Jin's blood boil. You got my homework, runt? Marcus growled, shoving Felix lightly. Felix fumbled with his notebook, stammering. I tried, but question 5 was, did I ask for excuses? Marcus snapped, snatching the notebook out of Felix's hands. Felix shook his head frantically, eyes beginning to water. Eris watched with a bored expression. Others in the hall either pretended not to notice or looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene, a sadly common reaction. Jin stepped forward. Hey, is there a problem here? He asked. Marcus turned, ready to snap at whoever dared intrude, then had to look up slightly at Jin. Marcus was big for a high schooler, but Jin was now taller and carried an aura of strength that gave even the bully pause. Who the hell are you? Marcus blustered. Name's Jin. I'm a new transfer student, he said. He glanced at Felix with a friendly smile. You okay, man? Felix looked surprised but nodded quickly, wiping his eyes. Marcus bristled at being ignored. He stepped toward Jin, trying to reassert dominance. This is none of your business, new guy. Just welcoming this nerd properly. Take a hike. Jin's eyes hardened. A rush of memories hit him. He had once been in Felix's position, and no one had stepped up. He wasn't about to walk away. Welcoming him, huh? Jin said, voice dropping icily. From where I stand, it looks like you're bullying him. A hush fell around the immediate area. Students began to take interest, sensing a confrontation. Eris arched an eyebrow, looking at Jin in a new light. Marcus let out a derisive laugh. So what if I am? You gonna stop me? Jin didn't back down. Instead, he actually smiled. Yeah, I think I will. In a flash, Marcus lunged forward and threw a punch aimed at Jin's face, but to Jin it felt like he was moving in slow motion. Jin sidestepped effortlessly. To everyone watching, it looked like Marcus had clumsily missed and stumbled forward. Jin helped him along with the slightest push between his shoulder blades, sending Marcus sprawling into the lockers with a loud clang. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Marcus whipped around, face red with humiliation and rage. He charged at Jin, trying to tackle him. This time Jin stood his ground. As Marcus collided with him, Jin didn't budge. It was like running into a wall. Marcus grunted in surprise, and Jin seized the moment. He grabbed Marcus by the front of his shirt with one hand and lifted him off the ground. It was a breathtaking sight. The bully's eyes went wide with fear. Students were forming a circle at a distance. The The new guy was manhandling one of the biggest bullies in school like it was nothing. Jin leaned in, locking eyes with Marcus. In a low voice only Marcus could hear clearly, he said, "I suggest you leave him alone. Understood?" There was a dangerous edge to his tone that made Marcus, for all his bravado, feel pure terror. "Yeah, okay," Marcus spluttered, all the fight gone out of him. Jin set him down roughly. Marcus stumbled back, breathing hard. He looked around at the witnesses, shame and fear warring on his face. With a final hateful glare at Jin, he turned tail and ran down the hall. Felix looked at Jin with awe and gratitude. "Thank you," he stammered. Jin gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Jin glanced at the others, who quickly pretended to go about their business, though their eyes lingered admiringly. He caught Brad glaring at him, fists clenched. Brad had been the king bully for years. Seeing his friend defeated must have been a blow to his ego. As for Eris, she was watching Jin intently, her cheeks slightly flushed. When he met her gaze, she flipped her hair and looked away as if uninterested, but the fact she was still peeking told another story. The bell rang for the second period. Students hurried off, buzzing about what just happened. Jin exhaled. It felt incredible. He grabbed his own books from his locker, preparing to move on. As he shut the door, Eris appeared beside him, one of her friends trailing behind, looking equally curious. "You certainly know how to make an entrance," Eris purred, her eyes fluttering flirtatiously. "That was impressive, Jin." She savored his name. Most guys wouldn't dare challenge Marcus. Jin offered a polite smile, hiding the contempt he felt. Of course Eris would suddenly take interest. In the past, she wouldn't even acknowledge his presence except to insult. "Bullies like him don't scare me," Jin replied lightly. Somebody had to put him in his place. Eris exchanged a look with her friend, who giggled. She stepped a bit closer, looking up at him through long lashes. "So Jin, where did you transfer from? I'd love to hear more about you." Her tone was sugar-sweet. "Okinawa," he said, "from the countryside. I'm enjoying the change of scenery here." Eris seemed delighted he was engaging. "I've never been to Okinawa. You have to tell me about it sometime. Maybe over lunch?" This bold invite drew a surprised look from her friend. Clearly Eris was wasting no time staking a claim on the new hottie. Before he could respond, Lily from English class rushed up, a bit out of breath. "Jin, wow, are you okay?" she asked with genuine concern, not even acknowledging Eris. "I'm fine, Lily," Jin replied warmly. "Thanks." Eris's friend cleared her throat. "We should get to class, Eris," eyeing Lily coolly. Eris forced a smile at Lily, though her eyes were icy. "Yes, see you around, Jin." She lightly touched his arm, then sauntered off with her friend. As she left, he heard her hiss under her breath to the friend. The queen bee was jealous. Lily looked a little puzzled as to why Eris even spoke to them. As they walked, Lily chattered about how bully busting might make him a hero to some and a target to others. Jin nodded thoughtfully but wasn't worried. He wanted them to target him. It would save him the trouble of seeking them out. By midday, Jin's presence had become the talk of the school. He had swiftly become popular. Lily and her friends, Felix, and a couple of others who introduced themselves, wanting to befriend the new guy. Across the cafeteria, he could feel Eris's gaze on him like a laser, despite her sitting with the cheer squad and football guys. She was clearly not used to a boy turning down her invitation, as he politely had by choosing to sit elsewhere. That only seemed to intrigue her more. Brad and his clique were at another table, casting murderous looks in Jin's way. He hid a grin by taking a bite of his sandwich. Good, let them come. He'd be ready. Over the next few days, Jin's life at school took on a surreal quality. By outward appearances, he was thriving, acing quizzes with his enhanced intellect, charming teachers and students alike, and diffusing bullying wherever he could. Meanwhile, Eris increased her efforts to get close. She started accidentally, bumping into Jin between classes, offering to partner with him on a class project, and complimenting him lavishly. "Jin, you did great in the debate today. You're so smart." She'd flash a brilliant smile that had made many boys melt. Jin played his part well, responding with friendly politeness, sometimes even mild flirtation, but he never fully gave in or asked her out. Inside, Jin's old feelings churned. There were moments he almost forgot who she was. When she laughed at his jokes or chatted about music, she seemed like a normal, even likable girl. But then Jin would catch a glimpse of her true colors, a flash of irritation when someone uncool tried to talk to him in her presence. It reminded him that her beauty was only skin deep. Underneath lay the same cruelty. Friday arrived, bringing with it the buzz of a big home basketball game. Westbridge's team was playing a rival school that evening. Jin wasn't particularly interested in sports before, but now he had multiple invitations to come watch, including an enticing one from Eris. "Come sit with me in the front. It'll be fun," she had chimed, holding onto his arm. He'd casually told her, maybe, keeping her on the hook. In truth, he was more interested in what the bullies might try during the hype of game day. Sure enough, during gym class, Brad made his move. The coach had stepped out for a few minutes, and the boys were shooting baskets. Brad sauntered over to Jin, bouncing a basketball. "Hey Jin," Brad called. "Think you're pretty strong, huh?" Jin caught the ball as Brad unexpectedly tossed it at him. "Strong enough," he replied. Brad stepped up, now face to face with him. He was a big guy, captain of the basketball team, and used to being intimidating. Marcus said you got lucky the other day. I say you owe him an apology for that cheap shot. Jin tilted his head. Funny, Jin answered. I think Marcus owed Felix an apology, and you owe quite a few yourself, Brad. A few O's sounded from the onlooking boys. Brad's nostrils flared. How about a one-on-one? He gestured to the basketball hoop. You and me, right now, unless you're scared. Jin understood immediately. Brad wanted to embarrass him in front of everyone in a game. Jin nodded. All right, first to 5 points? Brad cracked a grin, surprised that Jin accepted so readily. Sure, let's make it interesting. If I win, you'll get down on your knees and admit you're nothing but a worthless poser. Jin shrugged. And if I win? Brad scoffed. You won't. By now a large group had gathered, and even some girls peered in from the gym doorway, including Eris. She watched with a mix of worry and excitement. They began. Brad took first possession, dribbling hard. He was fast and skilled, but Jin's enhanced reflexes tracked every movement with ease. When Brad tried to drive past him, Jin stole the ball in a blink, leaving Brad stumbling. Jin didn't even rush. He stepped back coolly and sank a three-pointer from distance. The crowd whooped. Brad scowled, clearly not expecting Jin to actually have the game. Athletically, Jin found himself extremely capable. Coordination, speed, strength, all of it was far beyond an average person. He decided to give Brad a little hope before crushing him. They played on. Brad managed to score a couple of layups using his physicality, bumping into him, but Jin let those happen, gauging just how frustrated Brad was getting each time Jin effortlessly retaliated. The score reached 4-2 in Jin's favor, 1 point away from victory for Jin. On the next play, Brad, now sweating and desperate, he charged at Jin with an aggressive shove with an intent to knock him down, but Jin was immovable. Brad bounced off him and fell to the ground with a thud, the ball escaping his dribble. Jin casually picked it up and went for an easy shot. 5, Jin called. Game over. Cheers and laughter erupted from the onlookers. A few clapped. Brad seethed. This public defeat in his domain was too much. This isn't over, Parker, he growled under his breath. Jin whispered back with a smirk. I'm looking forward to more. Jin's popularity soared even higher. He wasn't just strong, he was athletic and cool under pressure. Eris was practically glued to Jin's side after gym class. I've never seen Brad so upset, she giggled, walking with Jin to the parking lot after school. You were amazing out there. She linked her arm through his and he allowed it. So, the game tonight. Will you come? I really want you to be there. Her eyes searched his, full of hope. Jin agreed with a charming smile. I'll come. I'll meet you there. Eris beamed, squeezing his arm. She looked like she'd won the lottery. Later, the gymnasium buzzed with energy that night. Jin slipped in through the side door, scanning for Eris. He spotted her easily. She was front and center in the student section. She lit up, waving him over. Jin approached and the students parted to let him through. He'd become something of a celebrity after that day's events. You made it, she beamed. We're losing right now, but maybe you'll be our good luck charm. He smiled politely. Brad was on the court playing, channeling his anger into the game. As the game entered the final quarter, Westbridge staged a comeback. A thrilling buzzer beater later, the home crowd erupted in celebration. They won by 1 point. The gym was a frenzy of cheers and claps. Eris hugged Jin in excitement, and he stiffened momentarily before patting her back. Eris grabbed Jin's hand. Come with me, she laughed, pulling him along. Let's go talk to Brad and them. I'm sure he's calmed down after winning. Jin allowed himself to be led. Brad was smiling for what looked like the first time in days, though that smile faltered slightly when he saw Jin approach with Eris hanging onto him. Great game, Brad, Jin said genuinely. He offered a friendly hand. Inwardly, he half expected Brad to snub it, but aware of all the eyes including Eris's, Brad forced a grin and shook Jin's hand firmly. Thanks, Brad replied. Glad you came to see how it's really done on the court. Jin just chuckled, not rising to the bait. Eris, proud to be between the two alpha males, said, Jin, you should totally join next year. You'd be unstoppable. Brad's jaw tightened, while Jin only smiled. Before Brad could probe that, Eris tugged Jin's hand again. Let's go grab a soda or something to celebrate. She turned to the others around. We're heading out, see ya, making it clear she was leaving with Jin. Eris steered Jin toward a quieter corner under a tree. Jin, she said, biting her lip in an uncharacteristic display of nerves. I had such a great time tonight. I'm really glad you came. I enjoyed it too, he replied softly. He gently took her hands in his, a gesture that made her breath catch. Jin, ever since you came Eris began, cheeks turning pink. I feel like we really clicked. You're not like other guys. You stand up for people. You're strong and smart and, well, you've seen I'm not as cold as people think. She was half apologizing for her past attitudes without outright saying it. Eris took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is, I really like you. Will you be my boyfriend? The last words rushed out, and she squeezed his hands, biting her lower lip as she awaited his answer. It was as vulnerable and sincere as Eris had likely ever been in her life. In this moment, she wasn't mocking or looking down on anyone. She was just a girl with her heart on the line. A hush fell as nearby students realized what was happening. The crowd around them grew subtly, a ring of onlookers holding their breath. Among them, Jin saw Lily and Felix watching with concern. He saw Brad and Marcus off to one side, Brad with a dark scowl and Marcus with grim anticipation, perhaps hoping Jin would reject her, and he could swoop in. Jin gently let go of Eris's hands. She looked momentarily confused by the change in his touch. He took a step back, his expression unreadable. "You're right, Eris," Jin began softly. "We did click, but before you get an answer, there's something you need to see." Confusion flickered in her eyes as he pulled out his phone. He showed her a photo, an overweight, timid boy she once called Piggy Peter. It took a second, but he saw the instant she recognized who it was. Her eyes widened. That's, she stuttered, nearly dropping the phone. She looked up at Jin's face, searching, her mind racing to deny it. He stepped back further, raising his voice a little so all could hear. "My name isn't really Jin Parker. I used to go by a different name, a name you all might remember, Peter." A collective gasp issued from the crowd. Murmurs erupted. "Peter? The kid who left school? The fat kid?" Eris looked like she had been struck. She stared at him, her lips parted in shock. "No, this is some kind of joke," she whispered, voice shaking. He was overweight, shy, an easy target?" Jin's tone sharpened, and the mask of gentleness dropped, revealing the simmering hurt beneath. "Yes, he was. And you, Eris, along with your friends, made his life a living hell." He stepped closer, and she instinctively stepped back, her eyes glistening now with fear and disbelief. Tears began to well in her eyes as the realization sank in like a dagger. Around them, students were either stunned silent or starting to whisper fiercely. Some were piecing it together, the timing of Peter's disappearance and Jin's arrival, or the way Jin had focused on bullies from the start. It was hard to believe, but seeing Eris's face, they knew it was true. Eris shook her head repeatedly, as if doing so would undo reality. I didn't know. Her voice cracked. Actual tears rolled down her cheeks, threatening the cosmetics she so carefully applied. "Peter, I'm so sorry. I never thought..." Jin felt a pang in his chest, but he steeled himself. "You never thought someone like me could be someone like this, did you?" he said, gesturing to himself. "All you saw was an easy victim. You mocked me, tripped me, made everyone laugh at me." Eris covered her mouth, sobbing softly now. "And you," Jin continued, turning his gaze to the crowd, where Brad, Marcus, and a few other bullies stood like deer in headlights. "All of you who bullied me, you thought there'd never be consequences, that I'd just disappear and you'd forget about me." Brad bristled and stepped forward, anger mixing with panic. "This is ridiculous. You're not that loser. You're just trying to mess with everyone," he shouted. Jin calmly walked closer to Brad. "You don't want to believe it, Brad? Fine. How about I jog your memory?" Jin's expression turned cold. "Freshman year, outside the science lab, you and your friends cornered a kid. You took his glasses and threw them on the ground, then made him crawl to pick them up while you stepped on his hand and spilling chemicals all around him." Brad's face fell. That was a very specific memory, one he likely didn't think twice about at the time, but hearing it recounted now sent a visible chill through him. "That kid was me," Jin said. He glanced at Marcus. "Sophomore year, Marcus. You locked Peter in the janitor's closet during prom so he couldn't volunteer at the concession stand as he'd promised. He banged on the door for an hour until a teacher found him after the dance." Marcus looked away, sweat on his brow. Gasps and disapproving murmurs came from some of the crowd. Many hadn't known the extent of what these bullies had done. Jin then gestures towards a couple of others. "Jason, you spread a rumor that I had a crush on Eris just to watch me get laughed at. And Eris?" He turned back to the trembling girl. "You started the Piggy Peter nickname that stuck to me for years." Eris sobbed harder, each word from Jin hitting her like a slap. He took a breath and addressed Eris one last time. "So, to answer your question, no, I will not be your boyfriend. I could never be with someone as shallow and cruel as you've been." His words were utterly without mercy, each one deliberate and loud. "I don't want your love or your pity. I wanted you to know how it feels to be hurt. This is my answer." Eris's knees seemed to give out, and she slumped to the grass, crying uncontrollably. She had been rejected publicly, and worse, called out as a villain in front of everyone. Suddenly, a furious shout broke the silence. "You freak!" Brad, face contorted in rage and humiliation, lunged at him. His fist came hurtling toward Jin's face, but Jin's reflexes were primed. He easily sidestepped, catching Brad's wrist mid-punch. With a swift motion, he twisted Brad's arm behind his back and shoved him forward. Brad yelped in pain as Jin slammed him up against the trunk of the tree. The crowd jolted in surprise. Two of the other bullies, including Marcus, decided to jump in then, rushing Jin together to help their leader. Jin whirled to face them. The first swung a wild punch. Jin ducked and delivered a precise open palm strike to the guy's chest, sending him sprawling backwards, gasping for air. The second tried to tackle his legs. Jin planted his feet and brought an elbow down on the back of the guy's neck enough to stun, dropping him to his knees. Brad, freed when Jin turned, tried to throw a blindside punch, but Jin caught it effortlessly. He gripped Brad by the front of his jersey and lifted him slightly, forcing Brad onto his tiptoes. By now, teachers who had been supervising the game crowd noticed the altercation and were running over. shouting for everyone to stop, but they slowed, dumbfounded at the scene. One new student single-handedly subduing 3 known troublemakers. Jin released Brad with a shove. Brad stumbled and fell to the ground at Jin's feet. Jin loomed over him and said, "I'll let you off easy today. Next time, there won't be a next time for you." Brad scrambled backwards on the ground, nodding frantically. At that moment, he looked nothing like the cocky athlete who ruled the school. He was just a scared teenager. The onlookers were silent, awestruck. Some teachers finally pushed through. Jin took a step back, raising his hands innocently. "They attacked me, coach," he said calmly. "I was just defending myself." Several students immediately voiced agreement. "Yeah, coach. They jumped him after Jin turned down Eris," students explained. Principal Matthews arrived, having been alerted by the commotion. He eyed the scene sternly. He looked at Jin, then at the bullies. "All of you, my office first thing Monday morning." Jin nodded silently, not worried. For a moment, he stood rooted to the spot, watching Eris's shuddering sobs. The exhilaration of his revenge flickered and faded. A memory rose, the countless times he'd cried alone in a locked bathroom stall, wishing someone, anyone, would notice his pain. A hollow pang swelled in his chest. "Is this all I wanted?" he wondered, alarmed at the emptiness that followed his triumph. His vision blurred, and he had to clench his fists to steady himself. Later, under the streetlight's glow, the echoes of Eris's sobs and Brad's defeat lingered in his mind. He had waited so long to exact this revenge, but the victory, it felt empty and harsh, as if he'd become the very monster they made him. As he decided to head home, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a dark-coated woman standing at the edge of the school parking lot, watching him with an unreadable expression. As their eyes met for a few seconds, recognition hit him. A flood of memories rushed back, and Peter realized she was the same woman from that night at the bridge.